Settle in, close your eyes, and let us journey back over 3,000 years to one of history's greatest mysteries. The Mediterranean Sea stretches endlessly before us, its waters reflecting the fading light of an age. Imagine standing on the shores of ancient Egypt around 1200 BCE, watching the horizon with growing unease. Ships appear, strange vessels carrying warriors whose origins remain unknown even to this day. These are the Sea Peoples, and their arrival marks the beginning of the end for the Bronze Age world. Tonight, we explore their complete story, from the first whispers of their movements to the lasting changes they brought to human civilization. Let the rhythm of this narrative carry you gently toward rest as we unfold this ancient enigma. To understand the Sea Peoples, we must first understand the world they would soon shatter. The late Bronze Age Mediterranean was a tapestry of interconnected kingdoms, each powerful in its own right, each dependent on the others for survival and prosperity. In Egypt, the New Kingdom pharaohs ruled from magnificent palaces along the Nile. Their empire stretched from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. The pharaohs commissioned towering monuments, maintained vast armies, and controlled trade routes that brought wealth flowing into their treasuries. Scribes recorded every transaction on papyrus scrolls, creating administrative networks that would impress even modern bureaucrats. To the northeast, the Hittite Empire commanded respect across Anatolia and northern Syria. From their capital at Hattusa, nestled in the mountains of modern Turkey, Hittite kings corresponded with Egyptian pharaohs as equals. They had mastered ironworking technology, giving their warriors a cutting edge, quite literally, over bronze-wielding foes. Their archives, preserved on clay tablets, reveal a sophisticated diplomatic culture where treaties were sealed and international marriages arranged. The Mycenaean Greeks dominated the Aegean Sea from their fortress palaces at Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and Thebes. These were the people who would later inspire Homer's epics. Their linear B-tablets show us a society obsessed with record-keeping, tracking everything from chariot wheels to quantities of perfumed oil. Massive cyclopean walls protected their citadels, built from stone so large that later Greeks believed only giants could have moved them. Along the Levantine coast, prosperous city-states thrived on maritime trade. Ugarit in particular stood as a cosmopolitan hub where merchants from Egypt, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Aegean mingled in busy marketplaces. Its palace contained texts written in 8 different languages, testament to its international character. These civilizations exchanged not just goods but ideas, art styles, and technologies. Copper from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, amber from the Baltic, lapis lazuli from distant mountains, all moved through intricate trade networks. Royal correspondence traveled between courts. Diplomatic marriages linked dynasties. Craftsmen migrated between kingdoms, spreading techniques and innovations. This interconnected world possessed remarkable stability. For centuries, these powers maintained a delicate balance, their relationships managed through letters scholars now call the Amarna correspondence. When conflicts arose, they were generally resolved through negotiation or limited warfare that left the fundamental system intact. But stability often breeds complacency. The very interconnectedness that brought strength also created vulnerability. These Bronze Age kingdoms had become interdependent, like a complex machine where the failure of one component could trigger cascading breakdowns. And somewhere beyond the comfortable world of palaces and treaties, forces were gathering that would test this system to destruction. The earliest hints of trouble appear in fragmentary texts and archaeological evidence from the decades before 1200 BCE. Like distant thunder presaging a storm, these warnings suggested something unprecedented was approaching. Hittite correspondence reveals growing anxiety about groups moving through Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean. Letters mention raids, displaced populations, and mysterious enemies whose names appear suddenly in royal archives. The Hittite king Suppiluliuma II would be the last of his dynasty. though he couldn't have known it as he penned urgent messages to neighboring rulers about naval threats and coastal disturbances. In Ugarit, that cosmopolitan trading center, tablets preserved in the ruins tell of desperate final days. One letter, discovered where it fell during the city's destruction, contains a plea for help. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. The sender was likely the last king of Ugarit, his words frozen in time as his kingdom died around him. Cyprus experienced a series of destructions. Major settlements were abandoned or burned. Archaeological layers show a clear break, prosperity ending abruptly, replaced by signs of violence and disruption. Some sites reveal hasty efforts at fortification, walls thrown up quickly, as if their builders knew time was running short. In Egypt, Pharaoh Merneptah faced invasions from the west around 1208 BCE. His inscriptions describe a coalition of peoples, Libyans allied with groups he identifies as coming from the sea and distant islands. Among the names he lists are Ekwesh, Teresh, Luka, Shurdan, and Shekelesh. The pharaoh claims victory, describing slaughter on a massive scale. But the very fact that such forces reached Egypt's doorstep signals something extraordinary happening across the Mediterranean. These weren't isolated incidents, but symptoms of a broader pattern. Climate records suggest this period experienced significant drought across the eastern Mediterranean. Tree ring data points to cooler, drier conditions. Reduced agricultural productivity would have created food shortages, displaced populations, and increased competition for resources. Hungry people make dangerous neighbors. Political instability compounded environmental stress. Succession crises, palace intrigues, and rebellions appear in various kingdoms during these years. The complex diplomatic network that had maintained peace began fraying. Trust eroded. Communication became sporadic. The mechanisms that had prevented small conflicts from escalating into catastrophes were failing. Archaeological evidence reveals that some communities began preparing for trouble well before crisis struck. Fortifications were strengthened, granaries were built or expanded, weapons were stockpiled. The pace of change accelerated, like a river approaching rapids, and those who could read the signs knew something terrible was coming. The question that has haunted archaeologists and historians for over a century remains deceptively simple. Who exactly were the Sea Peoples? The answer, frustratingly, is that we cannot say with certainty. What we have are names, strange names recorded in Egyptian hieroglyphs, names that hint at origins, but never quite reveal them. The Egyptians called them collectively the peoples of the sea, or foreign countries of the sea. This wasn't one unified nation, but rather a confederation of groups, each with its own identity, brought together by circumstances we can only partially reconstruct. The Shurdan appear earliest in Egyptian records. They served as mercenaries in Egyptian armies before turning hostile. Their distinctive horned helmets appear in Egyptian artwork, and some scholars connect them with Sardinia, though this identification remains debated. Warriors of the Shurdan type show up in reliefs depicting battles, their unique appearance making them instantly recognizable. The Shekelesh, possibly connected to Sicily, appear alongside other groups in invasion forces. The Luka came from somewhere in Anatolia, likely the region later known as Lycia. The Ekwesh might have been Achaeans, Mycenaean Greeks, though this connection is tentative. The Peliset would eventually settle in Canaan, where they became known as the Philistines, giving their name ultimately to Palestine. Other names appear in texts: the Teresh, Weshesh, Dinien, and Cheker. Each name represents a people with their own story, their own reasons for movement, their own desperate circumstances or ambitious plans. Some were perhaps refugees fleeing disaster. Others may have been opportunistic raiders seeing chances for plunder in a weakening world. Still others might have been mercenaries whose employers could no longer pay them, turning to self-employment through warfare. Egyptian artwork provides our best visual evidence. Temple reliefs at Medinet Habu, created during Ramesses III's reign, show the Sea Peoples in remarkable detail. The warriors wear various styles of armor and helmets. Some have horned headgear, others feathered headdresses. They carry round shields, long swords, and spears. Their ships differ from Egyptian vessels in design, with high prows and sterns decorated with bird heads. Crucially, the reliefs don't show just warriors. Entire families travel in ox carts. Women, children, elderly people, household goods piled high. This suggests not merely raiding parties, but migrating populations. People on the move with everything they owned, seeking new homes because their old ones had become uninhabitable or had been destroyed. Modern scholarship has proposed various theories about their origins. Some suggest they came from the Aegean and western Anatolia, displaced by the collapse of Mycenaean civilization. Others argue they originated from the central Mediterranean, Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, and moved eastward seeking opportunities. A third school of thought proposes they were actually locals from the eastern Mediterranean coast itself, given foreign-sounding names by Egyptian scribes who didn't understand the political complexities of the Levant. The truth likely combines all these theories. The Sea Peoples were probably not a single phenomenon, but multiple movements of different groups, occurring over several decades, each with distinct origins and motivations. Environmental stress, political collapse, economic disruption, and military opportunism all played roles. Some groups fled disaster while others created it. The movements fed on themselves. Each wave of destruction displaced more people, who joined the migrations, making subsequent waves larger and more destructive. What united them was their impact. Whatever their diverse origins, these groups collectively participated in one of history's greatest collapses, the end of Bronze Age civilization, as it had existed for centuries. Around 1200 BCE, the storm broke in full force. The archaeological record shows a wave of destruction sweeping across the eastern Mediterranean. Cities burned, palaces fell, trade networks collapsed. The great Bronze Age kingdoms that had seemed eternal suddenly faced extinction. The Hittite Empire, that mighty power that had matched Egypt for influence, simply ceased to exist. Hattusa, the capital, was abandoned and burned. The great palace where kings had ruled dissolved into ruins. Across Anatolia, major settlements show destruction layers from this period. The empire didn't fall to one catastrophic battle, but rather seemed to fragment and collapse, overwhelmed by multiple crises it could no longer manage. The last Hittite king disappears from records without even the dignity of a recorded death. In the Aegean, Mycenaean civilization experienced similar devastation. Pylos burned so intensely that clay tablets in its archives were accidentally baked hard, preserving them for modern archaeologists to discover. The palace at Mycenae itself survived, but many others did not. Trade connections broke. The administrative systems recorded in linear bead tablets stopped functioning. Within a generation or two, the Mycenaeans had lost even the ability to write, descending into what scholars call a dark age. The Levantine coast suffered terribly. Ugarit, that cosmopolitan trading hub, was completely destroyed around 1190 BCE. The city would never be rebuilt. Its destruction was so thorough that it was lost to history until archaeologists rediscovered it in the 1920s. Other coastal cities met similar fates: burned, abandoned, or reduced to shadows of their former grandeur. Cyprus witnessed widespread destruction. Major urban centers were attacked and burned. Some were abandoned entirely, while others shrank dramatically. The island's role as a crucial copper supplier to the Mediterranean world was severely disrupted. Contributing to broader economic collapse, Egypt, protected by geography and still possessing centralized military power, survived but barely. Ramesses III faced multiple invasions during his reign. His inscriptions and the elaborate reliefs at his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu commemorate these desperate struggles. The texts describe enemies advancing by land and sea simultaneously, a coordinated assault on Egypt's borders. The most detailed account comes from Ramesses III's year 8, around 1177 BCE. The king's inscriptions describe how foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands, how no land could stand before their arms. He lists the fallen kingdoms, Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alashia, the Hittites, Syrian kingdoms, and Cyprus, all cut down together. The sea peoples came both overland through Canaan and by sea across the Mediterranean. Rameses describes preparing a trap, fortifying the Nile Delta and positioning his fleet. The reliefs show the resulting battles in vivid detail. Egyptian soldiers and archers engage the invaders. Ships clash in naval combat, perhaps the first such battle ever depicted in art. Bodies fall into the water. The Egyptians claim total victory. Whether the victory was as complete as portrayed is debatable. Egyptian propaganda always emphasized pharaonic triumph, regardless of actual outcomes. What's certain is that Egypt survived when so many others didn't. But survival came at enormous cost. The invasions exhausted Egyptian resources, weakened central authority, and contributed to the gradual decline that would continue for centuries. The question remains, were the Sea Peoples the cause of this collapse, or merely one symptom of a broader crisis? Evidence suggests both. They certainly destroyed cities and toppled kingdoms, but they also emerged from conditions created by environmental stress, economic strain, and political instability. They were simultaneously victims and perpetrators, refugees and raiders, a complicated phenomenon that defies simple characterization. The clash between Rameses III and the Sea Peoples included what may be history's first recorded naval battle, immortalized in stone at Medinet Habu. Let us examine this encounter in detail, using both the Egyptian records and modern archaeological analysis to reconstruct those desperate hours on the water. The Sea Peoples' fleet approached Egypt's coast with confidence, born of previous victories. Their ships, as shown in the reliefs, were sailing vessels with high prows and sterns. They carried warriors armed with swords, spears, and shields, ready to storm Egypt's shores as they had done to other kingdoms. But Rameses had prepared carefully. Unlike his enemies who relied primarily on sailing ships, Egyptian vessels were oared galleys, giving them maneuverability regardless of wind conditions. The pharaoh positioned his fleet in the Nile Delta's waters, choosing the battlefield carefully. Egyptian archers lined the shores, ready to support the naval forces. When the Sea People's ships entered the trap, Egyptian vessels surrounded them. The reliefs show a chaotic melee. Egyptian archers rain arrows onto enemy ships, their range and rate of fire devastating to crews with no cover. Sea People's warriors fall pierced by multiple arrows. Some ships are grappled and boarded. Others capsize, spilling their occupants into the water where they drown, weighed down by weapons and armor. The Egyptian advantage lay in tactics and preparation. They fought in home waters with supply lines secure and reinforcements available. They combined naval and land forces, using archers on shore to supplement ships on the water. Most crucially, their oared galleys could position themselves favorably regardless of wind. While the Sea People's sailing ships were at the mercy of conditions, the reliefs show captured prisoners paraded before the pharaoh. Some are being counted, scribes recording tallies of the defeated. Egyptian texts claim thousands were killed, though such numbers always carried propagandistic inflation. What matters is that Egypt stopped the invasion. The Sea Peoples would not establish themselves in the Nile Delta as they had along the Levantine coast. Yet even in victory, Egypt was transformed. The cost of defending the kingdom drained resources. Ramesses III distributed land grants to military veterans, creating new power centers that weakened central authority. Economic disruption continued as trade networks remained broken. The victory at sea was real, but it couldn't restore the world that had been lost. Other naval encounters from this period are less well documented. We know Mediterranean shipping was severely disrupted. Piracy became endemic as central authorities lost control of coastal waters. The safe passage that merchants had long enjoyed disappeared. Ships sailed at risk if they sailed at all. Island communities fortified themselves, building walls and watchtowers to spot raiders. The Bronze Age had depended on seaborne trade, copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources, luxury goods moving between kingdoms. When the seas became unsafe, this entire economic system collapsed. Cities that had grown wealthy from trade suddenly found themselves isolated. Specialized craftsmen who depended on imported materials could no longer work. The complex international economy fragmented into localized, impoverished regions. Having failed to conquer Egypt, many Sea Peoples groups settled elsewhere, adapting from raiders to residents. This transition marks the beginning of a new chapter in Mediterranean history, one where these once mysterious invaders became the founders of new cultures. The Peliset, whom we know better as the Philistines, established themselves along the southern Levantine coast in what is now southern Israel and Gaza. Egyptian records suggest Ramesses III actually settled them there deliberately, perhaps as buffer populations to defend against further invasions. They founded 5 major cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, the famous Philistine Pentapolis. Archaeological excavations at these sites reveal a fascinating cultural mixture. The earliest Philistine pottery shows strong Aegean influences, particularly Mycenaean connections. Their architectural styles initially differed from local Canaanite traditions. They brought new technologies, including improved ironworking techniques. Yet within a few generations, Philistine culture had blended with local traditions, creating something unique. The Philistines would become famous as the antagonists in biblical narratives, the enemies of Israel, the people of Goliath. But archaeology reveals them as more sophisticated than ancient propaganda suggests. They were accomplished craftsmen, traders, and builders. Their cities prospered, engaging in maritime commerce and developing distinctive material cultures. Over time, they adopted Canaanite language and customs while maintaining certain unique cultural markers. Other Sea Peoples groups settled elsewhere. The Shurden possibly established themselves in Sardinia, though whether they came from there originally or migrated there remains debated. The Chequers settled near modern Dor on the coast. The Danaan may have become associated with the region around modern Turkey's southern coast. These settlements didn't happen peacefully. Local populations were displaced or subjugated. Existing political structures were overthrown. The archaeological record shows a clear break in many areas. Old cities destroyed, new settlements established nearby with different material cultures. Yet gradually, the invaders became locals, their foreign origins fading into legend. The broader Mediterranean world that emerged from this crisis looked dramatically different from what came before. The great Bronze Age kingdoms were gone. In their place came smaller, more localized powers. The age of palatial bureaucracies administering vast territories ended. Political fragmentation became the norm. Trade didn't cease entirely, but operated on a much smaller scale. The complex networks of the late Bronze Age, with their specialized products moving across vast distances, had collapsed. What replaced them were more limited regional exchanges. Communities became more self-sufficient by necessity, producing locally what they once imported. Literacy declined dramatically in many areas. The linear B-script of Mycenaean Greece was lost completely, not to be deciphered again until the 1950s CE. Many cities that had maintained administrative archives ceased keeping written records. Knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries was lost as scribal traditions died out. Population levels dropped significantly in most regions. Large urban centers shrank or were abandoned. Rural settlement patterns changed. People retreated from coasts to more defensible inland locations. The archaeological record shows a general impoverishment. Simpler pottery, less elaborate architecture, fewer prestige goods. The civilization that emerged from this crisis operated at a lower level of complexity than what preceded it. Yet this collapse wasn't entirely negative. The breaking of old systems created space for innovation. The alphabet, one of humanity's most important inventions, emerged from this period in the Levant. Iron technology gradually replaced bronze, democratizing access to metal tools since iron ore was far more common than the copper and tin required for bronze. New peoples and cultures rose, the Aramaeans, the Israelites, the Phoenicians, who would shape the first millennium BCE. Modern scholarship has spent over a century debating exactly what happened during the Sea Peoples period. New evidence continually emerges from excavations, challenging old theories and suggesting new interpretations. Let's explore the major scholarly debates that continue to this day. The single cause versus multiple cause debate remains fundamental. Earlier scholarship often attributed the Bronze Age collapse entirely to the Sea Peoples' invasions, a simple narrative of barbarian hordes destroying civilization. Modern research has recognized this as far too simplistic. The collapse resulted from multiple interacting factors: climate change, earthquake storms, internal political instability, economic stress, disease, and yes, human migrations and warfare. Climate data has become increasingly important. Studies of pollen records, drought indicators in lake sediments, and ancient texts describing food shortages all point to significant climate stress around 1200 BCE. A 300-year drought, one of the most severe megadroughts of the past 4,000 years, affected the eastern Mediterranean. Reduced rainfall would have caused crop failures, depleted water sources, and forced populations to migrate or starve. Some scholars emphasize systems collapse theory. The Bronze Age kingdoms had become so interconnected and interdependent that failure anywhere could cascade throughout the system. When one region experienced crisis, it affected trading partners, destabilizing them in turn. The complexity that had enabled prosperity became a vulnerability when conditions deteriorated. The Sea Peoples, in this view, were more symptom than cause, displaced populations moving because their own regions had become uninhabitable. The earthquake hypothesis, while less popular now than in past decades, still has proponents. Seismological evidence suggests a series of major earthquakes struck the eastern Mediterranean around this time. Collapsed buildings at various sites show patterns consistent with seismic destruction. However, earthquakes alone cannot explain the complete collapse of multiple civilizations, particularly the failure to rebuild that characterizes this period. Recent scholarship has also questioned whether we should even speak of Sea Peoples as a unified group. Perhaps this is a modern construct imposed on diverse phenomena. Different groups had different origins, motivations, and timelines. Treating them as a single entity oversimplifies a complex pattern of migrations, invasions, and settlements occurring over several decades. The degree of violence is also debated. Archaeological evidence clearly shows many cities were violently destroyed. But were these destructions always the work of foreign invaders? Some destruction layers might result from internal conflicts, slave revolts, or local power struggles. The chaos of collapse provides cover for all sorts of violence, not all of which fits the narrative of external invasion. Genetic and isotope analysis offers new avenues for research. DNA studies of ancient populations might eventually reveal migration patterns and population origins more clearly than pottery styles or architectural features. Isotope analysis of teeth can show where individuals spent their childhoods, potentially tracking movements of peoples. However, remains from this period are scarce, and preservation conditions often prevent successful DNA extraction. The Philistines have received particular attention from recent scientific studies. Analysis of skeletal remains from Ashkelon suggests they did indeed come from southern Europe, supporting the idea that at least some Sea Peoples had Aegean or Western Mediterranean origins. Their genetic signature shows up suddenly in the Levant at exactly the time Egyptian texts describe settling the Peliset. Another debate concerns the role of technology. Did the spread of ironworking contribute to collapse by making weapons more accessible to groups outside the traditional bronze-producing kingdoms? Did improvements in shipbuilding enable the naval movements that disrupted Mediterranean trade? Or were these technological changes themselves responses to the crisis rather than causes? The question of intentionality matters too. Were the Sea Peoples conscious agents attempting to conquer kingdoms, or desperate refugees whose movements accidentally destroyed the societies they encountered? The truth probably varies by group and situation. Some were undoubtedly raiders seeking plunder. Others were likely displaced populations simply trying to survive, destroying existing structures not from malice, but from desperate need for food and land. Beyond the battles and political upheavals, the Bronze Age collapse was experienced by countless ordinary people whose lives were shattered by circumstances beyond their control. Let us imagine what collapse felt like to those who lived through it, reconstructing their experiences from archaeological evidence and contemporary texts. Imagine being a merchant in Ugarit around 1195 BCE. Your family has traded along the Levantine coast for generations. The palace employs you to procure copper from Cyprus, exchanging it for grain and textiles. Your warehouse near the harbor contains goods from Egypt, the Aegean, and Anatolia. You're wealthy, respected, a person of consequence in your city. Then the letters arrive. Traders from the north bring disturbing news. Cities destroyed, refugees streaming southward, foreign warriors raiding coastal settlements. The Hittite Empire, which provided security to northern routes, has stopped responding to correspondence. Egyptian ships, once regular visitors, no longer come. Your last shipment from Cyprus arrived with stories of villages burned and copper mines abandoned. The king orders fortifications strengthened. Men are conscripted to build walls and watchtowers. Your eldest son is taken for military service. Grain prices rise as farmers hoard supplies. Foreign merchants stop coming, their ships staying safe in home ports. The exotic goods that filled your warehouse can no longer be sold. Who wants luxuries when bread is scarce? One morning, smoke rises from a neighboring town. Refugees arrive with horrific stories. The king sends desperate messages to Egypt and Cyprus, begging for military aid. No help comes. Your family debates whether to flee inland, abandoning everything you've built. Before you can decide, ships appear on the horizon. The attack comes at dawn. Warriors storm the harbor while fires spread through the lower city. You gather your family, grabbing whatever portable wealth you can carry. The palace is burning. The streets are chaos, fighting, screaming, people running in all directions. You flee through the eastern gate with a stream of refugees. Behind you, Ugarit dies. This story, replicated across the Mediterranean, captures the human experience of collapse. Archaeological evidence shows that many people did flee. Settlements inland from the coast often show sudden population increases during this period. Refugees absorbed into communities already struggling with drought and food shortages. For those in rural areas, collapse came differently. Farmers in the Hittite heartland might have seen tax collectors stop coming, palace orders cease arriving. Local strongmen filled the power vacuum, demanding tribute that once went to distant kings. Raiders might attack periodically, but the biggest threat was probably crop failure. Without the palace's administrative system distributing grain during shortages, local famines became deadly. Craftsmen who depended on long-distance trade were particularly devastated. A bronzesmith needed copper and tin, often from different sources hundreds of miles apart. When trade networks broke down, these craftsmen lost their livelihoods. Many probably returned to farming, their specialized skills becoming useless in a poorer, more localized economy. Literacy declined because scribes had been palace employees. When the palaces fell, so did the institutions that trained scribes and provided them employment. In Mycenaean Greece, the linear B script was used exclusively for administrative records. When the palace bureaucracies disappeared, nobody needed to write anymore. Within a generation or two, the knowledge of writing vanished. For women, collapse brought particular hardships. War widows and orphans became common. The social support networks that palace-centered societies provided disappeared. Women who might have lived comfortable lives in the old world found themselves refugees, dependent on charity, or reduced to survival prostitution in garrison towns. Children growing up during this period experienced a world far poorer than their parents had known. Cities were smaller, buildings simpler, goods scarcer. The stories elders told of the old days must have seemed incredible. Vast palace complexes, ships from distant lands, exotic foods and luxuries. But the physical evidence was all around. ruined buildings too large and sophisticated for current societies to replicate, remnants of a lost golden age. Yet humans are resilient. In the ruins of the old world, people built new lives. Communities adapted to changed circumstances. In some ways, collapse created opportunities. Without palace monopolies, independent craftsmen and traders could operate. Without massive bureaucracies, local communities had more autonomy. The world that emerged was poorer, but perhaps also more flexible, less rigidly hierarchical. The Bronze Age collapse and the Sea Peoples' invasions fundamentally reshaped Mediterranean civilization. The world that emerged from this crisis bore little resemblance to what came before, yet contained seeds of what would become classical civilization. The immediate aftermath saw what scholars call the Mediterranean Dark Ages. Population levels remained depressed for generations. Urban settlement declined. Trade continued at reduced levels. Writing systems were lost or abandoned in many regions. In Greece, the period from roughly 1100 to 800 BCE shows very little archaeological evidence. Genuine Dark Age where material culture became dramatically simpler. But darkness eventually gives way to dawn. The collapse of Bronze Age kingdoms removed obstacles that had prevented new groups from rising to prominence. The Phoenicians, based in coastal cities like Tyre and Sidon, became the Mediterranean's great maritime traders. They established colonies from Cyprus to Spain, including Carthage in North Africa. The alphabet they developed would be adopted by Greeks, and eventually evolve into the Latin alphabet you're reading now. In Greece, small communities gradually coalesced into city-states, the polis that would become Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and others. These developed political innovations including democracy and philosophy. The Greeks told stories of their Bronze Age past, transmitted orally through generations until Homer composed the Iliad and Odyssey in the 8th century BCE. These epics preserved distorted memories of Mycenaean civilization, transforming Bronze Age warriors into legendary heroes. The Israelites emerged as a distinct culture during or shortly after the collapse. Their origin remains debated, but they clearly developed during the power vacuum left by Egyptian and Hittite retreat from the Levant. The biblical narratives of conquest and settlement may preserve memories of this turbulent period, though filtered through centuries of oral tradition and theological interpretation. Iron technology spread widely as bronze became scarce. Iron ore was far more common than copper and tin, so iron tools were accessible to more people. This democratization of metal technology may have contributed to social changes, reducing the advantage that elite bronze-equipped warriors had previously enjoyed. The alphabet, developed around 1200 BCE in the Levant, was perhaps the collapse's most important innovation. Earlier writing systems like cuneiform and hieroglyphics required years of training to master. The alphabet, with its simple phonetic symbols, could be learned quickly. This eventually led to broader literacy, though that transition took centuries. Trade networks gradually rebuilt, but on different foundations. Instead of palace-controlled exchange of staple goods, Mediterranean trade became more entrepreneurial. Individual merchants and trading families operated independently, taking risks and reaping profits without bureaucratic supervision. This more dynamic system would characterize classical antiquity. The Philistines, those once fearsome sea peoples, gradually assimilated into Levantine culture. By the time they disappear from historical records in the 6th century BCE, they had become culturally indistinguishable from their neighbors. Yet their name endures. Palestine, a Roman designation for the region, derives from Philistine, preserving the memory of those ancient settlers. The collapse demonstrated that even sophisticated, powerful civilizations could fall. This knowledge shaped subsequent societies. Classical Greeks remembered the catastrophe through myth and legend, citing it as warning against hubris. The Romans, when they eventually built their own vast empire, studied earlier collapse to avoid similar fates, though ultimately they too would fall. Modern scholars see the Bronze Age collapse as a case study in systemic failure. It demonstrates how interconnected societies can experience cascading breakdowns. It shows how environmental stress, political instability, and human violence can interact destructively. It reminds us that complexity, while enabling prosperity, also creates fragility. These lessons remain relevant as our globalized world faces its own environmental and political challenges. The Sea Peoples themselves became legendary. Various groups have claimed descent from them over millennia, seeking connection to these mysterious warriors. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, European colonial powers used Sea Peoples theories to justify their presence in the Middle East, claiming ancient connections. More recently, fringe theories have attributed everything from biblical events to supernatural origins to the Sea Peoples, usually with little factual basis. Serious scholarship continues to refine our understanding. Each excavation season brings new evidence. Scientific techniques provide data unavailable to earlier researchers. Our picture of the Sea Peoples and their era gradually sharpens, though many mysteries remain. What emerges is a story not of simple barbarian invasion, but of complex human tragedy. Environmental disaster, political failure, economic collapse, and human desperation combine to destroy a world. The Sea Peoples were simultaneously perpetrators and victims, destroyers and refugees, a phenomenon that defies simple moral judgment. Their legacy is the world they helped create through destruction. The Iron Age Mediterranean, classical Greece and Rome, the traditions that eventually produced modern Western civilization, all grew from the ruins left by Bronze Age collapse. In destroying one world, the Sea Peoples cleared space for another. Despite over a century of research, many fundamental questions about the Sea Peoples remain unanswered. These mysteries continue to drive archaeological investigation and scholarly debate. We still cannot definitively identify the origins of most Sea Peoples groups. The Egyptian names are our primary evidence, but names alone prove little. Linguistic analysis suggests possible connections: Peliset to Philistines, Shekelesh to Sicily, Shurdan to Sardinia, but these remain educated guesses rather than certainties. Did these groups come from the places their names suggest, or were they named for places they settled rather than originated? The question of coordination intrigues many scholars. Did the various Sea Peoples groups cooperate in planned campaigns, or were they independent movements that happened to occur simultaneously? The Egyptian records sometimes describe them acting together, suggesting some coordination. Yet they may have been temporary alliances of convenience among groups with different origins and goals. What happened to the Sea Peoples who didn't settle in historically recorded locations? Some groups mentioned in Egyptian texts disappear from records without trace. Did they return to their homelands? Were they destroyed? Did they settle somewhere and lose their distinctive identity? We simply don't know. The fate of Bronze Age refugees presents another mystery. Millions of people lived in the kingdoms that collapsed. They couldn't have all died in the fighting or subsequent famines. Where did they go? Archaeological evidence shows some population continuity in most regions, suggesting many people simply stayed put, adapting to new conditions. But tracing individuals or specific communities across the collapse is nearly impossible with current evidence. The role of natural disasters remains debated. We know earthquakes struck some cities, but did earthquake storms, sequences of major quakes, affect the entire region as some researchers suggest? Climate data clearly indicates drought, but its exact timing and severity in specific locations is still being determined. How much can we blame nature versus human action for the collapse? Mysterious elements in archaeological evidence raise questions. Some sites show signs of careful, systematic destruction, rather than chaotic burning. Were these demolitions planned by retreating populations, or do they indicate something else? Other sites seem to have been simply abandoned without signs of violence. Why would people leave established cities voluntarily during such dangerous times? The question of writing's disappearance in some areas but not others intrigues scholars. Why did Mycenaean Greece lose Linear B completely while Egypt maintained hieroglyphics? Why did cuneiform persist in Mesopotamia, but disappear from Anatolia? The answers relate to how different societies used writing. but the specifics remain debated. DNA studies promise to answer some questions, but raise others. Recent genetic analysis of Philistines shows European ancestry, but it also reveals rapid admixture with local populations. How representative are these findings? Did all Philistines have similar origins, or were they a mixed group from the beginning? As genetic studies expand, we may finally trace these ancient migrations with precision. The timing of events remains frustratingly imprecise. Archaeological dating methods have margins of error that can span decades or even centuries. Did all these destructions happen in one catastrophic wave, or over several generations? The answer matters for understanding causation. But the evidence doesn't always allow certainty. Perhaps most intriguingly, we still don't fully understand why recovery took so long in some places but not others. Egypt declined but maintained continuity. Mesopotamian cities survived relatively intact, yet the Aegean world descended into centuries of poverty. Why did some regions recover quickly while others remained in darkness for generations? As we drift towards sleep, let us consider how the story of the Sea Peoples resonates in our own time. Their tale, though ancient, speaks to enduring human experiences and challenges that remain relevant millennia later. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that even sophisticated civilizations face fragility. The great kingdoms of 1200 BCE possessed advanced technologies, complex bureaucracies, and international networks. They seemed permanent, eternal even, yet within a single human lifetime most had vanished. This should humble us as we contemplate our own civilization's trajectory. Climate change played a crucial role then, as it threatens to do now. The megadrought that afflicted the eastern Mediterranean created conditions for catastrophe. Crop failures led to hunger, which led to migration, which led to conflict. Modern climate research suggests we may face similar cascading effects from environmental change. The Sea Peoples era shows what can happen when civilizations fail to adapt to changing environmental conditions. The interconnectedness that brought Bronze Age prosperity also transmitted crisis. When one kingdom fell, its trading partners suffered. Economic disruptions cascaded through networks, destabilizing even regions not directly affected by warfare. Our modern globalized world exhibits similar vulnerabilities. Supply chain disruptions, financial contagion, and cascading failures remain constant risks. The refugee experience, central to the Sea Peoples story, unfortunately continues today. Millions of people worldwide flee conflict, environmental disaster, and economic collapse, seeking survival and opportunity. The ancient Mediterranean's displaced populations faced the same choices modern refugees do: stay and risk death, or flee toward uncertain futures in foreign lands. Violence often accompanies collapse, as the Sea Peoples era demonstrated. Desperate people make desperate choices. Failing states cannot maintain order. Power vacuums attract opportunists. Yet the Sea Peoples also remind us that supposed barbarian destroyers often turn out to be complex human beings, victims of circumstances, families seeking survival, people adapting to impossible situations. The loss of knowledge during collapse should concern us. When the Mycenaean palaces fell, literacy vanished for centuries in Greece. Technological capabilities declined. Cultural achievements were forgotten. In our digital age, we assume knowledge is permanent, but history suggests otherwise. Civilizational knowledge can be lost if the institutions preserving it fail. Yet the Sea Peoples story also offers hope. Humanity survived the Bronze Age collapse. From ruins, new societies emerged. Innovation continued, eventually producing civilizations that surpassed what had been lost. The alphabet, iron technology, new political systems, all emerged from collapse's aftermath. Destruction, terrible as it is, sometimes clears space for renewal. The question of inevitability haunts scholars studying this period. Was Bronze Age collapse preventable? Could different choices by political leaders have avoided catastrophe? Or were the underlying stresses, environmental, economic, demographic, so severe that collapse was inevitable? We ask the same questions about our own challenges today. Archaeological research into the Sea Peoples continues because the questions matter. Understanding how civilizations fail helps us recognize warning signs in our own society. Studying how people survived collapse and rebuilt teaches valuable lessons. The past, though foreign in many ways, speaks to universal human experiences. As our journey through Sea Peoples history draws to a close, we return to where we began. Mystery. Despite decades of excavation, mountains of scholarly analysis, and increasingly sophisticated scientific techniques, the Sea Peoples retain their enigmatic quality. We will probably never know their full story. Too much evidence is lost forever. Papyrus rotted away, wooden ships dissolved in seawater, oral traditions forgotten as cultures disappeared. The questions that fascinate us most may never be definitively answered. Were they primarily invaders or refugees? Did they cause collapse or merely participate in it? Where exactly did they come from? And what became of those who left no lasting settlement? Yet perhaps the mystery is part of the story's enduring appeal. The Sea Peoples represent the unknown, the unexpected, the forces beyond comfortable understanding that can shatter civilizations. They remind us that history contains gaps, that ancient peoples remain partly inscrutable, that the past keeps secrets despite our best efforts to illuminate it. What we do know is sufficient. We know the Bronze Age world collapsed around 1200 BCE. We know various groups participated in this collapse, moving across the Mediterranean, destroying some kingdoms, settling in new lands. We know the world that emerged was profoundly different from what preceded it. We know real people experienced this catastrophe, feared, suffered, fought, fled, died, survived, adapted. The archaeological record preserves frozen moments from this crisis. A tablet bearing a desperate plea for help, baked hard when the palace around it burned. A destroyed city wall thrown down in fury or desperation. A new style of pottery appearing suddenly in a coastal settlement, marking the arrival of foreign peoples. A mass grave holding victims of violence, their bones testifying to ancient tragedy. These fragments let us glimpse human experience across 3 millennia. The details may be lost, but the broad outlines are clear enough. Civilization fell, people moved, violence erupted. The old world died and a new one was born from its ashes. The Sea Peoples, whatever their precise identity, played crucial roles in this transformation. Their story continues to evolve as research progresses. Each excavation season potentially brings new evidence. Scientific techniques improve, allowing analysis impossible for earlier researchers. Perhaps someday genetic studies will definitively trace their migrations. Perhaps newly discovered texts will reveal their origins. Perhaps underwater archaeology will recover their sunken ships, complete with cargo that illuminates their culture. Until then, we work with what we have. We construct theories from fragmentary evidence. We debate interpretations. We refine our understanding incrementally. The process is slow, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately rewarding. Each piece of the puzzle added brings us slightly closer to comprehending these ancient peoples and their tumultuous age. The Sea Peoples emerged from chaos, contributed to greater chaos, and eventually faded into history, leaving behind questions, ruins, and the seeds of new civilizations. Their story reminds us that history is not always progressive, that societies can regress or collapse entirely, that human experience includes catastrophe as well as triumph. Yet it also demonstrates resilience. The Mediterranean world did not end in 1200 BCE. It transformed. From Bronze Age kingdoms came Iron Age societies. From destruction came renewal. From collapse came innovation. The classical civilizations that eventually emerged, Greece, Rome, Phoenicia, owed their existence partly to the space cleared by Bronze Age collapse. The Sea Peoples, those mysterious raiders and refugees, warriors and wanderers, played their part in this great transformation. They destroyed much that was beautiful and sophisticated. They also, perhaps unintentionally, created space for something new. They were agents of change in an age when the old world could no longer sustain itself. As you drift into sleep, imagine those ancient ships crossing Mediterranean waters. Imagine desperate families crowded into ox carts, everything they owned piled around them, heading toward uncertain futures. Imagine palace scribes writing final messages as smoke fills their halls. Imagine warriors preparing for battles that would determine the fate of kingdoms. Imagine survivors in the ruins, wondering how to rebuild lives after losing everything. These were real people. Their experiences separated from ours by millennia, yet fundamentally human. They feared and hoped, loved and lost, struggled and sometimes prevailed. They lived through one of history's great catastrophes, and many of them survived to build new lives in a changed world. The Sea Peoples remain mysterious, but their humanity is not. Across the vast gulf of time, we can recognize ourselves in them. Both our capacity for destruction and our ability to endure, adapt, and begin again even after everything falls apart. Let this knowledge accompany you into rest. The Bronze Age collapsed, but humanity continued. Civilizations fell, but new ones rose. The Sea Peoples came and went, leaving behind mysteries that still fascinate us, lessons that still teach us, and stories that still echo through time. The Mediterranean grows quiet now. The battles are long finished. The ships have rotted away. The warriors have returned to dust. The cities they destroyed have been excavated, their stones numbered and catalogued, their secrets partly revealed. What remains is story, the story of a world that ended, the story of peoples who moved across that world, leaving footprints we can barely trace, the story of collapse and transformation, of endings and beginnings. In your mind's eye, see the sun setting over the Bronze Age Mediterranean one final time. The great palaces stand intact for now, but their days are numbered. The ships ride at anchor, their crews not yet knowing the storms that approach. The scribes write confidently, unaware these may be among the last tablets they produce. The world sleeps, comfortable in its sophistication, not yet aware that everything is about to change. The Sea Peoples are coming, or perhaps they're already here, or maybe they've always been here. Residents of Mediterranean coasts now remembered as foreign invaders. History is like that, complicated, ambiguous, resistant to simple narratives. But you need not worry about complications now. Let the story wash over you like gentle waves on an ancient shore. Let the rhythms of rise and fall, destruction and renewal carry you towards sleep. Let the mystery remain mysterious. Let the past be past. The Sea Peoples crossed the Mediterranean over 3,000 years ago. Their journeys are complete. Their battles are fought. Their settlements are established. Their stories, as much as we can recover them, have been told. Now it's time to rest. The Bronze Age has collapsed. The Iron Age will dawn in its own time. For now there is only the peaceful darkness, the gentle drift toward sleep, the quiet knowledge that humans have always endured, adapted, and continued, no matter what catastrophes befell them. The Sea Peoples have sailed beyond the horizon of history, into the realm of legend and mystery where they will remain. Let them go. Let history recede. Let sleep embrace you as we close this chapter on one of antiquity's greatest enigmas. The story is told. The journey is complete. Rest now, knowing that even ancient mysteries can comfort us with their familiar rhythms. Questions asked, but not fully answered. Stories told, but not completely known. Peoples remembered, but not entirely understood. Good night, traveler through time. May your dreams be as vast as the Mediterranean, as mysterious as the Sea Peoples, as enduring as the human spirit that survived the Bronze Age collapse and countless catastrophes since. The ancient world sleeps. So should you. The story ends where it began, with mystery, with the sea, with peoples whose names we know but whose full story remains forever just beyond our grasp, sailing into the darkness of forgotten ages, leaving only fragments, only whispers, only the eternal questions that draw us back again and again to contemplate their enigmatic journey through history.